Have you ever found yourself in a really bustling place, like a big party maybe, or a conference floor, and you just notice how differently people react?
Oh, yeah, totally.
You got one person who's just absolutely thriving, work in the room, buzzing from every chat.
Lit up, yeah.
And then someone else, maybe they're hanging back a bit, observing quietly. You can almost feel their energy kind of dipping.
Wishing for the exit, maybe? Or just a quiet corner?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that difference, that feeling, it taps into something really fundamental about us.
It really does. And that's actually what we're diving into today, this fascinating spectrum of introversion and extroversion.
Right. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to get way beyond just the usual surface stuff.
The stereotypes.
Yeah. We've gathered a whole load of sources, research papers, articles, real-world examples, to give you a much richer, more nuanced picture.
Think of it as like your shortcut to really getting it, understanding something that touches almost every part of life.
Friendships, work, how you relax, all of it.
Right.
We're hoping for some surprising facts, maybe some practical insights, even those aha moments about yourself or people you know.
We'll look at where these ideas even came from, the history, then the psychology behind them, what's actually happening in our brains, the biology, how culture plays a role, which is huge, and then the real world impact. Education, the workplace, relationships.
And yeah, definitely busting some of those persistent myths along the way.
There are quite a few of those.
Okay, so let's rewind. Where did this all start? The history bit. I think we have to start with Carl Jung.
Absolutely. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist. We're talking way back, 1921, his book, Psychological Types.
A classic.
It really was. He had this core idea about, well, he called it psychic energy or libido.
Right, not in the Freudian sense necessarily, but just mental energy.
Exactly. And he suggested it flows in one of two main directions, almost like an inner default setting.
So direction one, inward.
That's introversion. Focusing that energy on your internal world, thoughts, feelings, reflections. For introverts, solitude is like where they plug in to recharge.
And too much external stuff, noise, people, activity.
Draining. Really draining, can feel overwhelming.
Okay, so the flip side, directing that energy outwards.
That's extroversion. Towards the external world, other people, activities, things happening out there. Extroverts actually gain energy from that social buzz, from external input.
So that party scene, we imagined, the extrovert is feeding off it, while the introvert might be getting depleted. It kind of flips the script on social energy.
It really does. But Jung was clear, and this is important. Nobody is purely one or the other.
Not just neat little boxes.
No. He said we all have both orientations, just that one tends to be more dominant, which leads us to ambiversion.
The middle ground.
Pretty much. A blend of both introverted and extroverted characteristics. And honestly, that's probably most people.
Someone who can, lead a meeting really effectively, seem totally outgoing.
But then really needs that quiet evening afterwards to recover.
Makes sense. So Jung lays this groundwork nearly a century ago. How did things develop from there? Did people just run with his ideas?
Well, they definitely didn't stay static. One of the most famous developments was the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's heard of the MBTI. Catherine Cook-Briggs and Isabel Briggs-Myers, right, in the 40s.
That's them. They took Jung's ideas, including introversion, extroversion, and built this framework with 4 pairs of preferences.
And just exploded in popularity, didn't it? For personal growth, team building, career stuff.
Hugely. It made these concepts accessible, but it also got its share of criticism from the psychology community.
Mainly because it puts you firmly in one box or the other. That binary approach.
Yeah, that and questions about its sort of scientific validity and reliability over time, even though it's still widely used.
So what came next? Maybe something more scientifically grounded.
That would be the Big Five model of personality. It emerged later in the 20th century, and it's the standard in academic research today.
And how does it handle introversion, extroversion?
Extroversion is one of the 5 core traits, but crucially, it's seen as a continuum, a spectrum, not an either-er.
So like a sliding scale.
Exactly. It covers things like sociability, assertiveness, positive emotions. And introversion in this model is essentially the lower end of that extroversion scale, less about being a separate type.
Got it. Were there other key figures who shaped this?
Oh, definitely. Hans Eysenck was important, mid-20th century. He was one of the first to really push for a biological explanation.
Biology, like hardwiring.
Yeah, linking these traits to differences in our baseline level of brain arousal, how naturally alert our brains are. We'll definitely circle back to that.
Okay.
And then much more recently, you have Susan Cain. Her book, Quiet, in 2012.
That book made a huge splash.
It really did. It brought introversion into the mainstream in a powerful way, challenging that cultural bias, that often favors the loud and outgoing.
Highlighting the strengths of introverts.
Exactly. Deep focus, listening skills, thoughtful leadership. It was a game changer for how many people understood themselves and others.
It's helpful to think about real people, like historical figures maybe.
Good idea. Think about Albert Einstein, often described as deeply introverted, right? He needed that solitude for his revolutionary thinking.
Deep dives into his own mind.
Contrast that with, say, Winston Churchill. Extroverted, charismatic, a powerful public speaker who drew energy from the crowd, especially during wartime.
Wow, yeah. Totally different styles, both incredibly impactful. It shows you need both, really.
Precisely. Both approaches have driven history forward.
Okay, let's shift from history and get into the psychology. What are the nitty-gritty details? What defines an introvert?
So for introverts, the core is that preference for internal experiences. They often enjoy solitary activities, reading, writing, deep thinking, creative work.
And the energy thing is key.
Absolutely key. They recharge through alone time, big social events, even just a long day of interacting with people.
Can wipe them out.
Yeah. But they often excel at deep cognitive processing, sustained focus, complex problem-solving, strategic thinking. They're good at that.
What about how they communicate?
Often more thoughtful. They tend to process internally before speaking, so when they do speak, it's usually quite considered.
And that sensitivity you mentioned.
Right. Sensitivity to external stimulation. Loud noises, busy crowds, intense interactions, they can get overwhelmed more easily than extroverts.
Okay, so let's paint the picture for extroverts.
Yeah.
What are their defining traits?
Extroverts really blossom in those dynamic social settings. They draw energy from that external world.
Sociability is the big one.
Huge. They enjoy meeting new people, group activities, parties. Interaction actually boosts their energy levels.
That's fascinating.
They can also be motivated by external rewards, praise, recognition, and often more spontaneous, maybe acting or speaking more impulsively.
In those high energy places.
They feel comfortable, even energized in places like busy offices or parties. For an extrovert, too much quiet can actually feel draining or boring.
Which brings us back to the ambivert again. They really show how fluid this can be.
Exactly. Sitting there in the middle, they can enjoy socializing, but also value their alone time. They adapt.
That adaptability seems like a real strength.
It is. They can often switch gears depending on the situation, making them quite versatile.
How about how they process information? Is that different too?
Oh, yeah, significantly. Introverts tend towards deeper, more reflective processing. They like to analyze things thoroughly before acting, great for detailed work, maybe research or coding.
But maybe slower in a fast-paced crisis.
Potentially, yes. It can sometimes lead to overthinking. Extroverts, on the other hand, often process information more quickly, sometimes even thinking aloud.
Talking it through.
Yeah. Their external focus helps them adapt rapidly to changes. Great for, say, sales or emergency response. But they might occasionally miss subtle details an introvert would catch.
And emotions. How do they handle feelings differently?
Introverts often internalize emotions more, process them privately. This can lead to real emotional depth, but maybe makes it harder to share those feelings sometimes.
Okay.
Extroverts tend to express emotions more openly. They might seek external feedback or validation to help regulate how they feel. Good for bonding, maybe, but sometimes less self-reflection involved.
But it's not like these traits are always on in the same way.
Yeah.
Right? The situation matters hugely.
Absolutely. Critical point. Personality expression is highly context dependent.
So an introvert might actually seem pretty outgoing.
Among close friends, yeah. Or they feel safe and comfortable. And an extrovert might become quiet or withdrawn in a really stressful or unfamiliar setting.
I can picture that.
Yeah.
Like an introverted teacher who's great in class but needs total silence afterwards.
Exactly. Or an extrovert who loves brainstorming meetings but really struggles to knuckle down on a solo report. It's about the fit between the person and the environment.
And there are theories trying to explain why these differences exist at a deeper level. You mentioned Eysenck earlier.
Right, Hans Eysenck's arousal theory. He suggested introverts have a higher baseline level of cortical arousal.
Okay, Break that down. What's cortical arousal?
Think of it like your brain's natural hum or alertness level. For introverts, Eysenck theorized that hum is naturally higher. They're already quite stimulated internally.
So they don't need much from the outside world to feel alert.
Exactly. Too much external input pushes them over their optimal level. Extroverts, he suggested, have a lower baseline arousal.
So they seek out stimulation, parties, noise, activity.
To reach their optimal level of alertness, it helps explain why one person finds a library calming and another finds it painfully dull.
That makes a lot of sense. Any other theories?
Jeffrey Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory is another influential one. It focuses on responses to reward and punishment.
How so?
It suggests extroverts are more sensitive to signals of reward. They're drawn to pursue positive outcomes. Introverts, potentially, are more sensitive to signals of punishment or potential negative outcomes, making them more cautious.
And research backs this up.
Yeah, there are studies showing, for instance, introverts sometimes perform better on tasks needing sustained attention, like complex puzzles, while extroverts might excel more in social influence situations, like negotiations or group debates.
Wow. So it's not just psychological preference. It's rooted in our biology. What's actually happening in the brain. This is fascinating.
It really is. Okay, let's talk neurotransmitters. Dopamine is a big player.
The reward chemical.
Right. Research suggests extroverts have a higher sensitivity to dopamine's effects. Their brains get a bigger reward buzz from it.
Driving them to seek out those rewarding things like social interaction or new experiences.
Exactly. For introverts, who seem to have a lower dopamine threshold, the same level of stimulation can feel less rewarding, maybe even overwhelming. Too much dopamine isn't necessarily pleasant for them.
Can we actually see this in the brain?
We can, yeah. fMRI studies have shown more activity related to dopamine in the reward pathways of extroverts' brains during social tasks. It's like their brain is literally saying, yes, more of this.
Incredible. What about other brain structures? You mentioned arousal earlier.
Right. That links to the reticular activating system, the RAS. It's like a gatekeeper in your brainstem, controlling how much sensory information gets through and regulating overall alertness.
So different settings on the gate.
Kind of. The theory is introverts might have a more open gate or higher baseline activity in their RAS, making them naturally more aroused. They need less external input. Extroverts, maybe a more closed gate or lower baseline activity, so they seek out external stimuli to get to that optimal arousal level.
Okay, RAS, dopamine, anything else?
The amygdala is interesting too. That's the brain's emotion center, especially for threat detection.
How does that differ?
Some research suggests the amygdala is more reactive in introverts when processing certain stimuli, especially novel or potentially negative ones. This might contribute to that feeling of being easily overwhelmed or preferring calmer settings. Extroverts tend to show less amygdala reactivity in similar situations.
It really sounds like a lot of this is hardwired. You hear about twin studies.
Yeah, twin studies are crucial here. They estimate the heritability, how much is down to genetics for introversion and extroversion, is somewhere around 40 to 60%.
That's pretty significant.
It is. Researchers have even linked specific genes, like variations in the DRD2 gene related to dopamine receptors seem associated with extroversion. Other genes related to serotonin might play more of a role in introverted traits.
But it's not all genes, right? Environment must play a part.
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Great.
Genes provide a predisposition, a sort of blueprint. But your upbringing, your culture, your life experiences, they all massively shape how those genetic tendencies actually play out. It's always nature and nurture.
Even the nervous system responds differently.
Yeah, the autonomic nervous system controlling things like heart rate, sweating. Introverts often show a more reactive sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. They might react more strongly, physiologically, to stress or stimulation.
While extroverts might stay physically calmer in high-pressure situations.
Generally, yes. Their ANS tends to be less reactive.
Thinking long-term, evolutionarily. It makes sense that both types would stick around.
Definitely. You can see how both would have been adaptive for early human groups.
How so?
Well, the cautious, reflective nature of introverts. Great for planning, avoiding risks, noticing details others miss. Crucial for survival. And the boldness and sociability of extroverts. Probably better for leading groups, building alliances, exploring new territories, finding resources.
So both offered advantages. Teamwork makes the dream work, even back then.
Pretty much. Diversity in approach likely benefited the whole group.
Okay, so there's a strong biological basis, genes, brain structures. But people can change, right? personality isn't totally fixed.
No, definitely not fixed. That's where neuroplasticity comes, in the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on experience.
So life can actually shift where you sit on the spectrum.
It can. Major life events, therapy, deliberate practice. Like an introvert taking up public speaking might genuinely become more comfortable and skilled in that external domain.
Or an extrovert learning mindfulness might develop a greater capacity for quiet reflection.
Exactly. Our brains, and therefore our personalities, are more adaptable than we sometimes think.
Now let's talk culture, because how these traits are seen, how they're valued, that varies massively around the world, doesn't it?
Hugely. Culture acts like a lens, shaping both the expression and the perception of introversion and extroversion.
So in places like the US or Western Europe, typically more individualistic cultures.
Extroversion often gets the spotlight, right? It's associated with confidence, leadership, being assertive, seen as desirable.
And introversion in those cultures
Can sometimes be misunderstood. Maybe seen as shy or aloof or even lacking ambition. There's often an extrovert ideal, as Susan Cain put it.
But flip that. Look at more collectivist cultures, like in East Asia, Japan, China.
It's often quite different. Introverted traits like modesty, listening skills, restraint, fitting in with the group, those are often highly valued.
And being overly extroverted.
Might be seen as disruptive, maybe even a bit self-centered. Think of the Japanese concept of wa, or harmony. It values group cohesion and subtle communication, which aligns more with introverted tendencies. Very different from the American emphasis on, say, speaking up and self-promotion.
Does research show these cultural differences in scores?
Yes. Cross-cultural studies often find, for example, that people in East Asian countries tend to score lower on standardized measures of extroversion compared to Western countries.
But does that mean they are inherently more introverted?
Not necessarily. That's the complex part. It could reflect cultural norms about displaying certain behaviors. Maybe people suppress extroverted impulses to fit in, or maybe the tests themselves don't capture the nuances perfectly across cultures.
So someone might feel extroverted inside but act more reserved because that's expected.
Exactly. Or an introvert in a Western culture might push themselves to be more outgoing to meet expectations.
And globalization must be mixing things up even more.
Definitely blurring the lines. As people get exposed to different cultural values through media, travel, work, you see more hybrid expressions.
Like
An introvert from a collectivist background might adopt more assertive, extroverted behaviors in an international business setting. Or an extrovert from an individualistic culture might find value in mindfulness practices after exposure to Eastern philosophies.
Can you give us a specific country example?
South Korea is interesting. Rapid economic development has created this mix of traditional collectivist values and newer Western-influenced individualistic ones. So an introvert might excel academically, but then face pressure in the corporate world where networking and visibility are increasingly prized.
And maybe somewhere like Scandinavia.
Right. They often have a strong balance between valuing individual autonomy and social cohesion. Some argue that ambiverts might thrive particularly well there, as the culture supports both quiet competence and collaborative engagement.
Okay, let's bring this down to specific areas of life. Education, for instance. How do these traits affect learning?
Well, introverted students often shine when they can work independently. Deep research, writing, solving complex problems alone. They might find highly interactive or spontaneous group work a bit more challenging.
Whereas extroverted students
Thrive on that interaction. They love class discussions, group projects, presenting ideas. They often learn well by talking things through.
So for educators, the key is balance.
Absolutely. Create opportunities for both quiet, focused work and dynamic collaboration. Maybe give introverts advance notice for discussions so they can prepare thoughts. Encourage extroverts to sometimes pause and reflect before jumping in. Catering to both styles helps everyone.
What about the workplace? Huge implications there.
Massive. Both bring unique strengths. Extroverts often excel in roles needing lots of interaction, persuasion, energy, think sales, PR, some types of leadership. Introverts often gravitate towards and excel in roles requiring deep concentration, analysis, careful planning, research, writing, data analysis, engineering.
But it's not rigid, right? Introverts can be leaders too.
Oh, definitely. Think of Bill Gates. More introverted, known for deep thinking and strategic vision. Introverted leaders often excel through listening, careful planning, and creating space for others' ideas.
And extroverted leaders
Bring that charisma, energy, ability to inspire action. Think Oprah Winfrey, perhaps. The key is that both styles can be incredibly effective, just in different ways. Modern workplaces are slowly starting to value that diversity more.
How about our personal lives, relationships, friendships?
Big impact there, too. Extroverts often seek broader social networks, enjoying frequent gatherings and lots of connections. Introverts tend to prefer fewer but deeper, more intimate relationships. One-on-one connections often feel more meaningful.
And that can cause friction sometimes.
It can. An extrovert might see an introvert's need for alone time as rejection. An introvert might feel constantly pressured or overwhelmed by an extrovert's desire for social activity.
So understanding and compromise are key.
Essential. Recognizing it's not personal, it's about energy needs. Finding compromises may be agreeing on the frequency of outings or respecting downtime.
What about mental health? Are there different vulnerabilities?
Potentially, yes. Introverts might be more prone to anxiety or burnout if they're constantly in overstimulating environments without enough time to recharge.
And extroverts?
Might struggle more with feelings of loneliness, boredom, or even depression if they experience prolonged periods of isolation or lack of social connection. Their energy source is cut off.
So well-being strategies need to be tailored.
Ideally, yes. For introverts, strategies like mindfulness, scheduling regular quiet time, setting boundaries around social commitments can be vital. For extroverts, ensuring they have sufficient meaningful social interaction, maybe finding healthy outlets for their energy.
And creativity or leadership styles.
Again, distinct strengths. Introverted leaders, like maybe Abraham Lincoln, known for his thoughtfulness, excel at listening, strategy, building consensus quietly. Extroverted leaders, like Martin Luther King Jr., inspire through powerful oratory and mobilizing action.
And in creative work.
Introverts might produce more introspective, detailed work born from solitary reflection. Extroverts might thrive in collaborative, creative projects, brainstorming, bringing energy to innovation. Both vital.
Okay, it feels really important now to tackle some common misconceptions, because they are everywhere. Myth number 1, introversion is the same as shyness.
Yes, so important to bust this one. They are not the same.
Explain the difference clearly for us.
Shyness is about social anxiety. It's a fear of negative judgment in social situations. Introversion is simply about energy. It's a preference for lower stimulation environments and needing solitude to recharge.
So an introvert can be perfectly confident.
Absolutely. Many introverts are confident, articulate, enjoy socializing in doses. They just manage their energy differently and might choose interactions more selectively. They aren't necessarily afraid of social situations like someone who is shy might be.
Okay. Myth number 2, extroversion equals arrogance or being an attention hog.
Right. Also unfair. An extrovert's outgoing nature usually comes from a genuine desire to connect, share energy, engage with the world. It's not inherently about seeking attention for its own sake or being self-centered.
Just how they're wired to interact.
Exactly. Understanding these distinctions is key to not misjudging people.
And the whole idea of trick boxes ignores the ambivert, right? The ambivert advantage.
Yes, we keep coming back to them. Their adaptability, being able to dial up or down their introverted or extroverted tendencies depending on the situation, really challenges those rigid categories. They often get the best of both worlds.
Okay, this has all been incredibly insightful. Let's get practical. What advice can we offer based on all this for introverts listening?
For introverts, number 1 is energy management. Be proactive. Schedule that downtime after social events. Don't wait until you're totally drained.
Treat it like a necessity, not a luxury.
Exactly. Leverage your strengths, that deep focus. Use it for complex tasks. If assertiveness feels hard, maybe prepare some key points beforehand for meetings or conversations.
And boundaries.
Crucial. Learn to communicate your need for solitude politely but firmly. It's okay to say no to an invitation if your battery is empty. Protect your energy.
Good advice. Now for the extroverts listening, what can they do to maybe find more balance or depth?
For extroverts, it might be about consciously cultivating some solitude, trying things like journaling or meditation, even for short periods to foster self-reflection.
Yep.
Practice active listening. Really focus on understanding the other person, not just waiting for your turn to talk. Balance that wonderful spontaneity with a bit of planning sometime, especially in group settings, to ensure quieter voices get heard.
Broaden horizons.
Yeah. Seek out diverse experiences, maybe ones that push you slightly out of your usual social comfort zone to gain different perspectives.
And for the ambiverts,
Yeah.
how do they harness their power?
Ambiverts should really lean into that flexibility. Recognize when a situation calls for more outward energy and when it calls for quiet focus. Actively manage that balance between social time and solo time to avoid getting pulled too far in one direction.
Use that versatility.
Exactly. It's a real asset in work and relationships. They can often connect well with both introverts and extroverts.
Looking forward now, what's next in understanding all this? Neuroscience seems to be moving fast.
Incredibly fast. Techniques like fMRI, EEG, they're giving us a much clearer picture of how these traits actually look in terms of brain activity patterns.
Could we eventually have, like, biomarkers for introversion, extroversion?
It's possible. Future research might identify more precise biological markers that could potentially lead to more personalized approaches in mental health, education, maybe even performance coaching. It's fascinating, but also raises ethical questions.
In technology, how is that interacting with personality?
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Social media, digital platforms, they offer introverts ways to connect that feel less draining, maybe more controlled, and they allow extroverts to expand their networks massively, connect with people globally.
But the downside?
For introverts, constant notifications and the pressure to be on online can still be overstimulating. For extroverts, it can sometimes lead to more superficial connections, lacking the depth of face-to-face interaction. Finding balance is key.
Mindful tech use.
Definitely. And then there's AI.
Artificial intelligence. How does personality fit in there?
There's a growing interest in modeling personality traits in AI systems. Imagine AI tutors that adapt to your learning style, or chatbots that match your communication preferences.
Wow. Personalized AI.
It has potential benefits, but huge ethical questions too, right? Privacy, potential for manipulation, reinforcing biases, things we need to think about really carefully as this technology develops.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, what's the main takeaway for you, for our listener?
I think the biggest thing is that introversion and extroversion aren't just simple labels. They're dynamic, complex traits rooted in our psychology, our biology, shaped by our culture. Understanding them helps us understand ourselves and everyone around us so much better.
It's about appreciating that diversity in how we engage with the world.
Exactly. Whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, or an ambivert, navigating the middle ground, recognizing your own strengths, understanding your energy needs, and addressing your challenges, that's key for growth.
And hopefully this understanding fosters more empathy too.
That's the hope. Greater empathy, better communication, stronger relationships, more effective teams. As the science keeps evolving, we'll learn even more.
So a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your week, maybe just notice these dynamics. How does understanding this spectrum change how you see your own interactions? How might you use this knowledge to connect better, or maybe just give yourself or someone else a little more grace based on where your energy comes from?